Hi, and welcome to Movies Suck. You remember the BBC said that they weren't doing a Christmas special for Doctor Who because they had run out of ideas? Well, panic over, because the BBC have been all sneaky and subverted our expectations by instead making 2 New Year's Day specials. One of them is a kind of mini, low-budget, poorly acted, badly scripted rip-off of James Bond. At least it is if you squint really hard, turn your head a little to the left, step out of the room, shut the door, then while backing slowly up the stairs and chanting, "There's no place like Bond! There's no place like Bond!" enter your bedroom, turn on your computer, and put a James Bond movie on, then it is remarkably like a James Bond movie. The other one has echoes of a horror comedy stroke drama movie, vaguely reminiscent of those old Hammer horror movies. No, not the ones with the werewolves and silver bullets, not even the ones with Frankenstein, though we are in the right kind of area. No, it is the ones that are based on that old book by that guy with the beard from the black and white pictures from 1800 and something or other. What was his name? That's right, Bram Stoker. They based it on Bram Stoker's Dracula. They even have a character called Dracula in it, and a Jonathan Harker, though he wasn't in it after the first episode. They also had Amina, and a few others too. They even based the first of the 3 parts of this Doctor Who special in Dracula's castle, which is very like the book. Not to mention, the second episode took place on board a ship named the Demeter, and by this point I was absolutely astonished at how very like Bram Stoker's book it actually was. I even started to believe that maybe the BBC were making a version of the classic tale. But then I watched the 3rd episode and all became clear. For some reason, they had confused the Doctor with some middle-aged woman named Agatha, but I expect after you've been writing these special festive episodes for so long, it's just fun to mix things up and keep the audience guessing. Just to be sure, I thought I would check on IMDb and see who wrote this rather elaborate episode. And there it was, in black and white, Stephen Moffat. I thought he'd retired and moved on to other things, but he obviously just couldn't stay away and decided to get back into the Doctor Who game with a bang by writing this gothic seasonal episode, which he cleverly decided to disguise in the first part as a sort of one-off homage to classic Dracula movies. He then had a go at the bit of Dracula where Dracula takes a ship called the Demeter to England, but he seems to have not actually read the story. He decided to take a leaf out of the diversity handbook, and instead of having a crew of Russian sailors and no passengers at all, we get a whole bunch of diverse passengers, and even an interracial gay couple who are hiding their relationship due to the terrible unwoke state of society at that time. This was achieved by having the black character pretend to be a manservant, while the white guy is married to a young woman who appears to be unawares of her husband's indiscretions, and who seems to think that she is in a real marriage. Dracula himself is also posing as a passenger. And we also have an Indian doctor and his daughter. The doctor had encountered a vampire once before, and the trauma of that encounter had brought him to the conclusion that he needed to carry poison wherever he went, so that he could top himself in case of another vampire encounter. We also meet a down-on-her-luck countess, who is on her way to England to sell her life story to a publisher who wants to write a book and revitalise her fortunes. She, as we find, had met Dracula many years before when he killed her mother, and he also kills her, so then he has a matching set. And that was basically the biggest bit of character development we saw in this episode, as pretty much everyone else here was just a thin veneer slapped onto a rather sparse story. Dracula then carries on killing the majority of the passengers and crew in short order, though part of the crew in this version does escape on a boat one night, so the captain is left with the passengers, a cook, and someone who snuck on board pretending to be someone else. We also saw the return of the current Doctor Who, Agatha Van... Oh, hang on. She usually just goes by the Doctor, doesn't she? So let's not confuse things. Well, it turns out that Dracula has been keeping the Doctor prisoner since the first episode, and slowly drinking her blood the entire trip. A very short trip, it appears, as Dracula seems to manage to kill just about everybody within the first few days of setting off, and then suddenly England hoves into view, whereas the original trip from Bram Stoker's seminal book took almost exactly 1 month. After the remnants of the passenger and crew check the cabins for the murderous culprit, they find the Doctor in bed looking decidedly worse for wear, but still manage to believe that she is the murderer, thanks to Dracula telling them so, which obviously would be very convincing, as the Doctor appeared unable to even get out of bed, and was also apparently supposed to be an invalid, even from the start of the trip. At this point, you are keenly aware that the writers of Doctor Who are mostly in the fantasy part of the series, as logic seems to not be the script writer's strong point, as is shown by how they finished this unfortunate misstep in the Doctor Who canon. Finally, after a few more hijinks involving the Doctor, the Captain, and sinking the boat, we finally reached the third and final episode and arrive in merry old England, though England hasn't felt nearly so merry since we hit the noughties. That's just my opinion. And ta-da! The writers hit their stride and the Doctor Who episode gets into full swing. No more pretense at a gothic horror story. We are now really into the writer's safe place, in the modern day, with modern people and modern attitudes that don't have to be copy and pasted into places where they just don't belong. We have body positivity, women in positions of power, and the shallow throwaway feel of youth in modern society. And obviously, an 18th century vampire would find himself right at home in this era. Which is lucky, as Dracula is woken up by some sort of secret organisation created by Mina, Jonathan Harkin's fiancée from the first episode, who we find was allowed to escape, as Drax was far more interested in the Doctor at that time. This organisation is mostly comprised of incompetent imbeciles, as shown when Dracula comes ashore, whereby they manage to allow a freshly woken up Dracula to get the best of them in moments, using their own equipment, before he then wanders off and discovers the marvels of fridges, good for storing bodies, and televisions, good for looking directly at the sun without the pesky blindness that can occur as a result of this particular ocular idiocy. After he has marvelled at these wondrous trappings of modern life, he is bamboozled by the Doctor, who... You see what I did there? Alright, I'll get me coat. Who, by proving she can demolish the house around him and expose him to the sun, takes him prisoner for later study. But just when they thought they had won, good old Drax manages to understand all modern technology, and using a tablet and the internet, even though he had only been reawakened the night before, manages to contact his lawyers, who are not even slightly put out that one of their clients is still alive and looking very young 123 years later. The blood-sucking lawyer frees the blood-sucking vampire, and they all live happily ever after, or at least that is sort of how it looks, since very little of any note happens beyond this point. But eventually, the Doctor, who is dying of cancer, yay, finally, we can be free of this current Doctor Who hell. Oh, wait, they made another new series, didn't they? Damn. Anyway, she catches up with Dracula and proves to him that all his fears of things like crosses, holy water, stakes, and sunlight are actually just phobias, created by him believing the beliefs of people through the ages, and that he really had no reason to fear anything at all, since it was all made-up nonsense. Dracula then decides that since Agatha Van Doctor Who thing is dying, he also wants to die, so he helps her die by biting her so that her death is painless, by using his amazing powers of drinking people's blood and causing them to have happy dreams. But by drinking her dead blood, he manages to kill himself. The end. And yes, I hear your resounding, what the hell? And I second that, since Dracula just discovered that none of his phobias were real. And he knew that for sure after a little bit of sunbathing. But somehow, the phobia about drinking dead blood still killed him, even though he now understood that these silly superstitions were just that, superstitions. Also, we discovered in the first episode, a vampire is unable to commit suicide, so yet again, this attempt should have failed. Not to mention, he just discovered that he was both immortal and essentially invincible, so why would he suddenly choose to kill himself instead of achieving his goal of making a perfect bride and spreading his vampirism, which hitherto had been his ultimate goal? Luckily, the Doctor managed to bamboozle his poor primitive 15th century brain with her undeniable logic that makes a complete mockery of all vampire lore. But that's just fine, because bastardizing great works of art is what the BBC does best. Look out, Shakespeare, the BBC's coming for you too. Imagine Hamlet all woke and left leaningly enlightened. Imagine the to be or not to be speech. It could be something like this. To be thee or not to be thee or the. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the names and tweets of outrageous misgendering, or to take arms against a sea of Nazis, and by opposing resist them, to dye my hair, to sleep no more as I moan about climate change, and by sleep to say we end the menace of nasty words said over the internet, the heartache of not getting our own way, the thousand natural shocks that come as we discover the world doesn't revolve around us. Actually sounds pretty good, I might go see that. Bollocks I will. In conclusion, it is nice that the BBC has kept Doctor Who going for as long as they have, but maybe it's time to let it go for a while. And maybe, in a few years, they can bring it back again, once they've gotten over their left-leaning, man-hating bigotry, and decided that writing good stories and making good TV is of greater value than the virtue-signalling tosh we have been getting recently. Oh, and just in case I am actually wrong, and this was meant to be a proper version of the Dracula story and not an extended episode of Doctor Who, then I would conclude by saying, don't watch this. Watch some of the old Hammer horror movies instead. They were far superior to this drivel. This has been Movies Suck saying, welcome to my house. Enter freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring. Signing out. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the flip side.